Hello everyone and welcome back. It is Wednesday the 10th of March and we're here for President Question Time. First, as we asked yesterday, we're going to be playing our candidate videos, so we'll just go straight in with them.
Hi guys, I'm Chelsea Gruby and I'm running for re-election of Student Union President. I wanted the role for 3 years before I was first elected in 2020, and these last 7 months have literally been nothing short of amazing. I've gone above and beyond and achieved more than I thought I ever could, especially during COVID. So I just thought I'd share some of my biggest wins with you guys, and then I'll give you some more information later on. So I've supported students with their academics and their mental health support, looking for more resources, looking for more funding, trying to help this process be as easy as possible for you guys basically. I've also improved halls on campus and looked at a long-term plan and seen how we can implement new social spaces and seeing what we could do to make the experience of living on our campus as easy as possible and as comfortable as possible. I've also created new student employment opportunities with the university. More information will be released about that soon and you'll see those in September. Another thing I've done is organise training for student union staff to make it more inclusive, whether it's be online or in person, and also worked tirelessly all year to make sure that blended learning this year, for something new to us all, was as easy as possible. I know that it's difficult working from home. I myself work at a desk that's 2 feet away from my own bed and sometimes it can be hard to switch off. So making sure that I have those conversations with you and then relaying information back to staff is really important. And also using our course reps, which have been elected this year, who have been massively helpful and really successful, to make sure that they can do their job in supporting you guys as well. Increased mental health support is something that we speak about all the time and we probably will do for years to come. That's something that I'll continue to work on next year if elected, and also trying to save you money, as we know that this year has been really difficult financially, so looking at travel and also looking at local businesses to see if we can find some savings and be sustainable with the local communities. If you wanted some more information, head to my socials, which is Chels for Pres. Everything can be found on there. There'll be some videos, student testimonies, and all of my information about my campaign.
Fantastic. So here we are, question time. Don't forget guys, you can ask your own questions in the chat function of this live stream. Just head over to the question and answer and submit your questions. Make sure these questions are going to be able to be answered by all our candidates. But I think rightly so, we should get along with it. Let's get into it with our first question. Our first question of today is number 1. Course reps depend on volunteers. How would you encourage students to volunteer? And Chelsea, you'll go first.
Thank you. Encouraging students to volunteer is really important, not only because it helps the union to work and thrive, but also because it gives students really important life experience and job experience for after they leave. Usually when we're on campus physically, we'll speak to people during Freshers Week, we'll put out posts on social media. Obviously this year has been really difficult for us with doing the majority of things online, but we've still had that communication with students. You know, we've put things out regularly. We've tried to speak to you physically where we can, when it was safe. That's something we'll continue to do, so hopefully when we're allowed to come back to campus. But working with the course reps this year, we've set up course rep conferences, giving students more social opportunities, allowing them to meet each other and gather feedback. I think that's really important. And you tend to find that word of mouth really is how people find out about the role, and that's how people are encouraged to go for the volunteer roles with us at the SU. And I think that's something obviously that we'll try build on from here on out, and just keep doing everything we're doing with the social media, and hopefully you'll see us around campus next year trying to pull you in and get you involved in everything that we've got going on.
Excellent. Thank you, Chelsea. Mariam cannot join us today, so it's just going to be Chelsea answering our questions. So I'll try not rush you through them, Chelsea. I'll give you a bit of time to breathe and think. So great, thank you for that. Moving on to question 2, a bit more simple for you. What is your primary aim as president?
Primary aim as president, that's a hard one, because obviously there's so many things that I want to do, but I think for me it's just making sure that the student experience is as good as it possibly can be, whether that comes in the form of doing really well academically or supporting you with mental health or supporting financials or anything else that's really important during your time as a student. It's making sure that I prioritise what the students are asking for and that I open those conversations, and they know that I have an open door policy and they can drop in any time to speak to me about any worries that they might have. I know this year I've had students message me at all hours, and I've replied to them as and when I can, and we've seen, you know, some of them be really successful since, whether that be trying to be more comfortable in the space they're on campus when they've been isolated, or whether, you know, they needed help with extensions or mitigating circumstances, whatever that might be. I'm always up for a chat, always give out my advice, and it's good for me to be able to give out the 4 years of student experience that I've had and direct people in the right direction. And that's basically the basis of me as president, you know, just trying to make it as easy as possible and as enjoyable as possible.
Okay, great, fantastic. So you mentioned there about being there for students and supporting students. What do you feel is your primary aim within your new manifesto going towards next year?
Even though it falls more under the Vice President remit, there is a massive emphasis on mental health and provisions at the minute. Obviously, we know through COVID, students have really struggled with being isolated, not being able to go out and enjoy the activities that they normally do, sporting being shut down, societies being unable to run the way that they should be, and just making sure that when we can return safely, if we can, that they're given the physical space and capacity to do that, and we support them at the Students' Union, whether that be with funding, setting up new clubs and societies, or even just giving them advice to do things further afield that aren't involved with the university, giving them all that support and all the time that we have. And I think even if everything is still online next year, continuing the way that we have, offering things that are remotely online that people can access from at home within their bedrooms, whether that be, you know, yoga, video game nights, tournaments, just making sure that we offer a range of things that will suit any type of student. And also just listening to the feedback again, making sure that we're asking all the time, you know, is this something that you enjoy? Is there anything you'd like us to run? And really just taking that information and going with that.
Okay, excellent. So I'll gather from your question, from the answer there, that you're going to be looking to help support the new Vice President in offering welfare provisions and getting everything running. Okay, excellent. So that kind of what you answered there leads into my next question, which is around blended learning. And what do you think blended learning is the new way students will learn at university, and what would you do to further support this approach?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of conversations about blended learning this year, and we've really tried to engage with the students and ask them if that's something that they've enjoyed, you know, what their troubles have been, whether that's accessing things online, whether they found that they work okay using electronic resources like ebooks rather than physical ones, obviously with the closure of the library during lockdowns. And it really is a mixed bag. Some students obviously find that it's much more accessible for them to be able to access that from home, whether that be mature students, people who would normally commute. Obviously, they've not got that time where they normally travel, so they can be more productive. But then there's also students that learn much more in person and they prefer the physical aspect, being able to speak to lecturers face to face and build those relationships with their classmates. So moving forward, regardless of COVID, I think it's important that if anything is offered blended, that there's a mix of physical and online, whether that be physical sessions return and then all sessions are recorded. So if a student's working or if they've got an emergency, they can watch that back afterwards. But having the option to be back on campus and back to somewhat normal, I think is really important to the majority of our students. So that's what we'll be aiming for, obviously in the safest capacity possible.
Thank you. Okay, so question number 4 is around the academic side of your role and your future role. So how can you help support and develop academic societies here at Leeds Trinity?
So thinking about academic societies for next year, I played around with the idea of everyone automatically being implemented into a new one when they come. So if you start as a primary education student, you would be put into a primary education society, which would be all the way from level 4 up to level 6. And if it's a course where you start at foundation or you're a postgrad, you'd also be put in a school for that as well, like a whole psychology group. That would be a great way to speak to people who have already been through the placements and done the assignments that you'll be submitting. And also somewhere that you can get advice that will be specialised to your course, people that have had the experience and can give you an insight into the resources that you might need, the time that you'll need to put in, say if it's for extra reading. or who the best staff to go to are. I think that's really important for students to have those connections and be able to speak between themselves, because you find that students find it much easier to have a conversation with another student than they do a staff member. So being able to implement that and give them a space to do that between themselves is, I think, pretty critical for the next year.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So question number 5 is around the HE sector and higher education. So what do you think has been the most successful higher education campaign within recent years?
That's an interesting one. There's been a lot of higher education campaigns. We've seen a lot of them this year. The one that really stands out to me, obviously, is the one that we've been involved with this year, that was run by the National Union of Students specifically. That was the hashtag Students Deserve Better campaign. We saw that we ended up winning £50 million from the government, and that was distributed towards all of the universities in the UK. That was for the COVID hardship funding. So for those that might not have seen it, that's for students who have obviously lost hours at work or might be struggling financially for whatever reason. And then that's been distributed by the university. But that was something that I worked really closely with the university on when we were given notification on it, and also campaigned nationally for. So not even just for our own students, but for all of the students within the UK, which is pretty huge. And I know from personal feedback that students have really benefited from that. You know, it's taken away a large deal of stress for them, especially those that have maybe had to pay for double the amount of rent if they're living somewhere at home and then they've also had a student house to pay for, or they couldn't make rental payments in halls, and anything else really, just general day-to-day living. So I'd probably say that one.
Excellent. Thank you, and it was a great campaign to be a part of and working towards this year, and it's hopefully made students' lives a bit easier and better during these hard times during the pandemic, and we've been able to give them a little something back. Before moving on, again, just to anyone joining us, we're here with Chelsea live in the Q&A. Mariam has not been able to join us today, sadly, but she is still obviously, of course, running in our president candidate. But moving on, question number 6 is around student engagement and the student voice. And the question is, how would you encourage increased engagement within our existing student voice activity?
So again, it really falls down to COVID. Physically, when we're around on campus, it's easy for students to drop into the office, speak to us. We can have a really informal conversation with them about what we offer. In terms of overall student engagement and student voice, we've seen this year actually that we've had one of the most engaged course rep groups that we've ever had, regardless of the numbers, which obviously show us lower than previous years, but that was to be expected because everybody's so focused on trying to get into the new swing of things with blended learning, and go about their day-to-day lives with stress and mental health problems that, you know, we've really seen people go above and beyond this year to try help their cohorts, their peers, and even people that aren't studying on the same courses as them. And obviously we saw that we had a lot of submissions at the beginning of the year through the LTSU website, policies that were taken to council to benefit our students, things like recording lectures, signposting for mental health, you know, all these campaigns that are massively important that we've asked students to feed back to us on, and they've come to us and said this is exactly what we want, and we've been able to carry that forward for them. So to increase engagement, it's just to carry on the way that we are and just continue that open line of communication to let the students know that if there is something they would really like us to campaign for, or something that they themselves would like to campaign for, that we can give them the space to do that and we can facilitate that for them.
Thank you. So again, moving on to question number 7. Can you name one project or initiative that you would like to implement to help students shape their own learning?
Yeah, definitely. So during one of the course rep conferences this year, we were joined by some staff who were currently working on an academic project. And obviously during any project at the university, it's important that we get the student feedback the full way through. So we know how practical things are, whether they work, whether it's easy to understand, easy to navigate. And that's continuing on for next year. I am limited in the information I can give out about that, but it will help people track their own attendance, their own marks, and they can see which areas they're falling short, and you can see how many times you've accessed Moodle, which resources are being most used by your cohort. So if you've missed an online journal that's on Moodle and everybody else has used it for one assignment and you might have skipped past it by accident, you'll be able to see that through that application, which will help you pick up things a lot quicker. should give you access to more resources. And like we say, once everything's hopefully back normal in the swing of things, we'll look into a way to do that physically for you as well. So physical text in the library, and look into getting more resources that way too.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is around tackling the BAME attainment gap at Leeds Trinity. So the question is around what steps would you take to tackle the BAME attainment gap?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, when I first really started campaigning with the SU, I said that was one of my main goals, to work with the university to tackle the gap. And for those that might not know, the BAME students, Black and ethnic minorities, tend to achieve lower than the rest of our students, and that's obviously something that we don't want. We want everybody to have, you know, a fair game, everybody to achieve as best as they can. So this year I've worked with the Race Equality Charter and the Inclusion Committee to make sure that every student has equal opportunities, and that's another way when we were looking at blended learning, to make sure that everybody has provision for accesses, so making sure everyone's got laptops. If you've got a disability you've been reached out to, you've got all the software that you need. But with the BAME attainment gap, it's difficult because it is going to be a very long process. It's not something that you can just say, right, this is one thing that we need to put in place and then it'll be fixed overnight. It will take months to years of small changes and big changes to really start to see the impact. But working with other universities and other students' unions, I've seen ways that we can create volunteer opportunities and send students on professional placements to basically bulk out their CV and make them more professional, and also help them in their academic learning. And then also making sure that any resources we give out are as inclusive as possible. Having guest speeches in from BAME backgrounds is really important, giving people someone to look up to and think, you know, I didn't think I could ever achieve a leadership position in this role because everybody I saw in that role was maybe white or just wasn't from a BAME background, and that gives them, you know, the encouragement and the inspiration to move towards those roles. And I think that's really where we're starting from, and we'll continue to build on that over the next few years.
Okay. So question number 9 is around Leeds Trinity in general. Straightforward. If you could change one thing at Trinity, what would you change?
That's a difficult one. I feel like I might go for the obvious. This year, obviously, you might have seen my campaigns for the heritage halls. It's been a long time coming, speaking with staff and students. That's obviously something that's very money dependent. You know, we need to be approved for the finances, and thankfully we have been. That's just a small step towards the big changes that are coming on campus overall, not just for halls, but for all social spaces, for the main buildings. So the change for Trinity, I think physically, would just be to make it more accessible, more inclusive, make sure it's a more comfortable place to be during the day, whether you're between lectures, in lectures, or just here maybe for sports training or sporting events, whether you're coming for an open day or if you're coming back to visit as an alumni, just making sure that the campus feels as welcoming as possible. And there's some of the changes that I've already started discussing as part of projects for this year with the university. So I hope to be able to carry that forward into next year, and hopefully COVID will calm down so you can all see some of the changes that are going to start to be implemented soon, because they are very exciting.
Okay, so before we move on to question 10, I'd like to reach out to our members out there watching, wherever you may be at home. Please do submit any questions you have for our candidates. Just go to the live Q&A box and we'll publish your questions, and we'll get them read out at the end. Please do submit them. Really, just any questions you have for our candidates, just please do submit and we'll get them to answer accordingly. But moving on to question number 10. So Chelsea, what do you view as the biggest challenge higher education will face post-COVID?
Definitely the welfare of students. Like I said, we've seen increased numbers of students struggling this year, and we know that if you self-refer in Leeds for your mental health, you can be on a waiting list of up to 8 months. It's ridiculous, if I'm being honest, the amount of time you've got to wait for that support. And I think really trying to nail down the areas in which students are struggling the most is going to be so crucial to us for the next few years, to make sure that students can make it through the entirety of their university time, and not only that, but enjoy it at the same time as well. And that's where opportunities from the student union really comes in, for activities and seeing people around campus. but also making sure that we're supporting other services at the university, like being able to apply for extensions and mitigating circumstances and taking feedback from the academic voice form, to make sure that we're not only reacting to a situation once it hits crisis level, but we're also preventing people from getting to that stage. So by tackling it in the early stages, it's just as important as helping people when they get to a point where maybe they can't help themselves. So trying to support them the full way through their journey and not only interacting with them at the end, I think is really important, and that's something we strive to do all the time.
Thank you. Question 11 is, how would you increase student representation on university committees?
So every year we reach out to students to sit on our academic committees. Sometimes it can be really formalised, it can be quite difficult to understand. I know even when I first came into this role, after sitting on committees for 2 years, there were things that I picked up on, maybe types of language or the way the agendas are written, that I didn't think was straightforward enough. So I've spoken with Lucy this year as Democracy and Representation Coordinator, and also got in touch with someone called Sam from the university, and he organises training for all of our volunteers who sit on the academic boards. I've also become the chair of one of the boards this year, a co-chair, along with the DVC, and we spoke about the way to make it more accessible for students, make it more appealing to students. So we're looking into doing some personalised training next year with smaller groups, with the chairs of boards and the people that would be involved. I would encourage anyone that wants to see how things work behind the scenes to get involved with the boards at the SU. There are definitely ways to break it down, and obviously you've got the support of all the university and the SU staff there as well.
Okay, so you mentioned a few things there. So how would you look to increase minority groups who are underrepresented at these levels at the university committees? How do you feel you could get them to become student representatives within these committees?
It's all about building confidence, I think, not just subject to those groups, but a lot of students feel like they're not academic enough, or maybe they've not had enough experience with public speaking, or maybe they just feel daunted about the experience. I think putting on training sessions for all students, particularly for those groups, to give them the skills they need, to give them the confidence they need to be able to sit in a room with university staff and representatives from the SU and give their honest and open opinion about their experiences is really important. And that's something we've also tried to do this year with training sessions for the representatives we've got at the minute. Obviously, there's more that we can put in place. We can always do better. So moving into the new year, we try to get things organised earlier. Obviously, COVID pushed us back a little bit this year. So we know what we're going into in the future. So just trying to get everybody together, introduce them, and even work off each other. So, you know, some role-playing sessions, hot seating, doing it physically in a safe or a friendlier environment before going into those rooms, I think is really important. But it's also great to note that the university staff are really supportive. Any student representative we ever have turn up, they're happy to answer emails, have calls with, go through the agendas with you before the meetings, and explain anything to you that you might not understand if it's happened before you've joined the board. So that's a massive point for us, and also something that we work on all the time.
Excellent, thank you. Question 12. As President, you'll be responsible for representing the views of all Trinity students, not only at University Level Committee, but also at the Board of Governors and as Chair as the Trustee Board. The question is, how will you separate your own opinions and views to the views and opinions of the student body?
Yeah, really important question. And I've touched on this before. It's more about me giving the students the platform to speak for themselves. So this is why we have student council, it's why we have course reps, you know, and really making them believe that they can make the difference, because ultimately my role wouldn't exist without the student voice at all. And I can set goals for the year and I can stick to those, but I'd much rather students come to me and tell me what they want from us as a students' union and what they want from me in my role. And then I can prioritise that and run with it. And we saw that in January when we came into the new lockdown. You know, I had goals that I had for the term, things that I wanted to work on, and I basically shifted everything, took the feedback from the students that got in touch with us and was continually asking for feedback and for support with campaigns. And we saw that a lot of students then found relief and felt like they were being represented, but I also passed on the contact details of staff, and students were setting up their own meetings. They were being independent. They'd come back to me and say, you know, I've had this conversation with this member of staff about this topic, and this is the change that we've seen, and they've been able to make changes on their own. So it's not about me standing as a figurehead and saying that I know the opinion of every student, because ultimately I never will, because there's so many of them and there's no time in the day to speak to everybody, but I'll give them the platform to speak for themselves. And if I ever do speak on behalf of all the students, it'll always be after I've gathered the feedback to make sure that what I'm saying is accurate. And if I don't know, then I'll just say that I'm not sure. I'll get back to the students and then I'll tell them at a later date.
Thank you. So only a few more questions left for you, and then we'll be going to the live Q&A that the students watching have published questions. So question number 13. Before we go to question 13, actually, do get any more questions into our live Q&A chat if you have any questions. Please, this is one of your last chances. I probably will say that a few more times, so don't worry if you can't think, get thinking. We've still got a few more questions before that though. So question number 13. Do you think the university has offered Do you think the university has offered adequate resources to students who are writing dissertations and essays during the pandemic? Is there anything you would have liked to have seen done differently? I can't repeat that because I did.
No, that's okay. I've got it. Controversial, potentially. I think for everybody, especially final years this year, it has been really difficult, and obviously we've seen the closure of the library and you have been limited with the resources that you've got. I did have conversations at the beginning of the year with library staff to make sure that reading lists for next year were updated by all lecturers, to make sure that you've got every core text that you need, so students aren't having to go out and spend all their own money on their own resources, because I think if you're paying for your tuition and you're paying for a course, your institution should at least give you the core materials to do that work at the level that should be acceptable. I don't think any university during COVID will have given the students as much as they wanted. That's not because students have got unrealistic expectations. It's just because we came into something that was completely unknown, something that was completely new. Everywhere can make improvements, and the university, when we've gone back to them with feedback from students, have been really helpful. They've always taken everything on board and done everything that they could possible. I know they spoke about physically sending out books and texts to students. At the time it wasn't doable, so they had a look at making more online resources and looked at the subscriptions. So everything was just a constant moving process. But I think for those students that have really struggled, we've seen the statistics from the Learning Hub this year. They've had more engagement from students who've been writing their dissertation, asking for help, than years previous, which is really positive. And those students have given some really good feedback about that service as well, saying that their marks have gone up and it's massively helped them. I think for anyone who is going through that at the minute, I know dissertation period's looming, people are sat writing them probably as we speak. If there is any help that you need, do get in touch and just let anyone at the SU know exactly what it is that you need, and that can be taken back to the university. Because often the motto that we run by, I know certainly me and Chris do, is if you don't ask, you don't get. So sometimes it's just about being a little bit cheeky. Even if you think it's not doable, you can always ask. The worst they can say is no, but more often than not, the university will always be happy to help you out.
Thank you. And then question number 14 is our last question of the bunch that have been submitted before our event today. Is around, with the university recruiting a new Deputy Vice Chancellor, how would you introduce them to the work of and the relationship with the union?
So during the recruitment of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, myself and Chris are both involved with the shortlisting and the interview process, so they get to meet us in the first instance. Upon the appointment, we'd obviously look to set up initial meetings to meet with not only us, not only the staff team, but also with any volunteers that would like to get involved. This year, with our interim Deputy Vice Chancellor, we've seen him being invited to trustee meetings, council meetings, course rep conferences and everything else that we've got involved. It's again about keeping open that line of communication. I know that I speak with our current DVC multiple times through the week, and me and Chris have regular meetings with him. And he's great. He's always willing to take feedback from us and talk about topics that students are bringing to us all the time, because our exec understand that we are the clear line of communication between the students and them. So we will bring them everything that they need. But again, we just carry on the way that we are. We have a really healthy relationship with the DVC, and hopefully we will continue to after the selection process, and just make sure that we offer them as much support as we can. In turn, they will do the same for us. It's all about a push and pull relationship, really, and having the confidence to start those conversations that are really important.
Excellent, thank you. So that is the end of our questions that have been submitted beforehand, and some of my own. And now we move on to the live questions from the audience. Please do, this probably is your last chance, submit any if you have any. Last chance to ask Chelsea, and we get a question over to Mariam if we can to answer. So question number one from the audience is, what does president mean to you?
Well, that depends whether you want a really soppy answer or not, I suppose. But I mentioned in my manifesto, this was something that I wanted for 3 years before I was first elected last year. To me personally, it's more than giving back to the university, because I loved my entire experience, and that was down to the Students' Union mostly, because I engaged so much. I think for me, it's something that I'm really passionate about that comes through whilst I'm speaking, whether I'm speaking at a million miles an hour or just whittering on about something that we've achieved this week, because I want everybody to know. It's about looking after people who perhaps feel like they don't fit in, people who haven't had that much academic experience before and don't feel like they can get through the process, or just those people who want something new to try, and feel like they don't have the confidence to join a sport club or a society, and everybody else in between. You know, I share my student experiences all the time because I think it's really important to tell students that no student experience is ever going to be perfect. There's going to be bumps in the road. And if they can hear that from someone who's been through it and can sit now in this position and make such big changes, I think that makes a big impact. So yeah, I think it's just trying to reflect how successful you can be, but also not that age doesn't mean you're successful, your title doesn't mean you're successful. It's what you define as your own success. That's what I give off as president, that as long as you're happy in what you're doing, that's it. That's where you need to be, and you should be happy being there.
Thank you. So another question from the audience, and it is, what excites you most about this role?
So obviously being in the role, that's a difficult question. It excites me, the possibility of being able to carry it on, finish everything I've started this year, and also move on to some new projects, which obviously I'll speak to the students about. I've got some ideas in mind already as well. Hopefully be able to see a fully physical Freshers Week. That really excites me after last year. Obviously we delivered as much as we could, but it'd be great to try and get back to sort of some form of normality. But it might sound really sad. There isn't a day that I wake up and I dread going to work. Everything excites me about it. Every day is different. Every conversation is different. You know, going from a meeting with one staff member to the next, you can be talking about student academics, and then the next meeting you can be talking about counselling services, and the next one events on campus, the next one where should we put a new social space. You know, everything is ever changing, and I think that's what I love about this role, that there's always something new and exciting to get involved with, and there's always a way to bring students in and get them involved as well, which is obviously what we work for. So yeah, that's it. I think just a great role to be in.
Okay, so you mentioned Freshers Week, funny enough. The next question leads on from that, and is a question from the students that says, if Freshers Week can't go ahead as planned this year, what is the best way friendships can be created?
So this goes back probably to some of the questions from the VP question time yesterday, you know, trying to get activities started, societies and sports as much as possible, whether that is online or physical, really making sure that students can create those relationships, trying to make the move-in experience as easy as possible for new students on campus. That's always really important to us, making sure they're equipped with all the advice that they need. I know I released some top tips, and so did you, Chris, at the beginning of this year, for how best to move in and start to create those friendships with people. And then also falling back on the academic societies conversation we had earlier, making sure that you are reaching out to those people who will potentially be on your course, whether they're a year or two above you or starting at the same time as you, I know that when I used to study primary education, I had a lot of friends that were in the later years, level 5 and level 6, and they used to give me loads of invaluable advice about day to day and how best to tackle things. And I think that is really key. But obviously we're hoping that people can be out and about on campus next year, you know, get to know people by face. That's the great thing at Trinity. You'll know people just when you're walking through the corridor, and it really is such a homely feel. So that's what we're hoping to go back to. If not, we will find other ways of facilitating things online. Socials will run, activities will run. We'll always find something to give you the opportunity to meet new people, because we know that's really important.
Just one final question from our audience, and it is, how would you work with a vice president with conflicting goals to your own?
So like I said earlier, your goals obviously you set before you come into office in September, and that's something that you believe is really important. That can also go off student feedback from the previous year. But if there was a goal that conflicted between me and the vice president, it'd be a case of sitting down, speaking to not only them, the staff team, our student council, our elected representatives, and asking what their opinion is, because ultimately we make our changes for the students. So if we have a conflicting opinion, there's obviously a difference there of what we would prioritise. But if you ask the student what they want and they side with whether that be the vice president's opinion or the president's opinion, that's the way to go, because it's for the students. So you take the student stance on it. It'd never be down to a personal opinion or a personal thought. I wouldn't ever run a campaign just because it was something that I was personally interested in, because ultimately I'm not a student anymore. So it won't benefit me in the long run. It'll benefit everybody else, hopefully for years to come. So that'd be the way to tackle that problem.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you everyone for watching at home or wherever you may be. That's all we have time for, and that's all the questions we have today. I'd like to again thank Chelsea for coming along and answering all these questions to the student body. And just the last one to say, don't forget to use your vote before Friday, 2 p.m. Vote, vote, vote is all I can say. Make sure you do use your vote. I don't want to squeeze any more vote. Any more words about voting in. But Chelsea, any final remarks before we head off?
Yeah, just a massive thank you from everybody who supported the campaign so far. I've seen some crazy engagement on social media, people sharing posts, people commenting, people messaging me, asking, you know, what I'm interested in. There'll be some Q&As going live at the end of this week and towards the end of voting, and also after today if anyone's got anything burning that they'd like to ask me after some of my answers. Just check out my social media at Chels4Pres, and just feel like you can message me anytime. I'm an open book. If there's something you want to know and I've got the answer, I will definitely tell you. But really appreciate today, Chris, thank you. And also thank you to Lucy for setting it up, and everybody who is watching who I can't see, thank you for joining us, and hope to see you all at the results on Friday online.
Yes, as Chelsea mentioned, join us from 6 p.m. Friday for our live results night to see all our successful winners to all their roles, volunteer and leadership within the union. Again, that's all we have time for. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you soon. Have a lovely week and make sure you vote. Good night. God bless. I'm off to bed.